my time would have been better spent focusing on building out the teams instead of always kind of strapping one on it when I'm under the gun and I need one extra cleaner.
Today, I'm super excited to be here with Robert Duncan. He's the founder and CEO at Sarasota Property Rentals. You've got a combination right now of owned, arbitrage, and co-hosting. You started buying properties in 2018, grew that to 20 plus listings, and then regulation came out that changed a little bit how you were having to think about the future.
Sarasota City passed an ordinance where they're basically trying to tax the short-term rentals out of their market.
You were saying something about how you will team up with other fellow hosts and operators. How does that work?
Well, what it does is I'm working on building the relationships and making contacts every day.
So if that's true, and there's already an excess of inventory sitting down on the MLSs, are they wrong by thinking, let me hold on my asking price? Should they rather sell right away, perhaps start lowering the price right away?
The people that are holding on, there's a certain amount of pride and ego that's in there in addition to their sunk costs during their fix and flip. I don't think they're thinking long term.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Hospitality Edge podcast, where we bring together what we think are two sides of the same coin, real estate and hospitality, and where we aim to bring together entrepreneurs, investors, founders, leaders in the vacation rental and hospitality space so they can tell us about their stories, the lessons they have learned along the way, as well as any mistakes they might have made along the way as well, so we can avoid making those same mistakes ourselves. Today, I'm super excited to be here with Robert Duncan. He's the founder and CEO at Sarasota Property Rentals. We'll be talking about a couple of interesting topics, specifically related to combining midterm rentals with short-term rentals. What's unique about the pricing strategy when you're mixing those two, segments of midterm and short-term rentals. We'll be talking about how short-term rentals is more of an inbound optimization strategy versus midterm rentals. There's an element of outbound, that you have to do to go and find those sources of bookings. We'll be talking as well about how as an industry there's an opportunity as we speak to grow inventory for vacation rental operators like Robert by tapping on all the inventory that's sitting down on the MLS from properties that have not sold, that are sitting there for a little while. So there's a lot of interesting things we'll get to touch on. But before we go through all of that, Robert, thank you for being here today. But also, let's start by understanding, if you were to start all over again in this industry, knowing what you know today, what, if anything, would you do differently, and or what advice would you give yourself, if you were starting over again in this space?
I would focus on building my teams. I have a habit of I'm going to do it. I'm going to fix my car. I'm going to mow my yard, and my time would have been better spent focusing on building out the teams, getting them trained up, instead of always kind of strapping one on it when I'm under the gun and I need one extra cleaner. If I had built the head cleaner up and taught her how to recruit, that would have taken a lot of burden off it my back. Same thing with my maintenance guys. Instead of me going and fixing the plumbing, having a guy that's trained with our timekeeping system and tools ready to go. So that would allow me to scale up much faster with much less worry.
Hmm. And how did you learn that lesson?
When you get a tenant calling you at 12 o'clock at night with a plugged pipe and you've got to go fix it because you don't have anybody and the plumber can't get there until tomorrow, or they're going to charge you an arm and a leg. Whereas if I have somebody
Mm.
on staff, they can go and I'm going to pay him a reasonable rate because I'm paying him all the time anyway. It's the same thing with the cleaners. You get the economies of scale of when you have your own crew and then you have a head cleaner on top that can maintain the quality. Your actual cleaning rate is usually about half what you would pay on, say, something like Turno or in Facebook Marketplace. So, in addition to having a higher quality, having people on tap, so you're not stressed on having cleaners, your cost of labor is like half, and you can't beat
Hmm.
that.
And why do you think? Because this is not something, you're not the first one that says this is something that they've learned. In terms of, at first they were trying to do everything themselves, and then they realized the power of building team, the power of delegation. In your case, why do you think that was perhaps an issue at first? The mindset of, like, I want to do it all, I want to, bet, if you want it done right, let me do it myself. What was it for you that kept you from learning this lesson earlier?
The money. I figured I could save money if I did it by myself, and the cleaners can clean better than I can, and they can do it cheaper than I can. So yeah, that one in particular was a painful lesson of, yeah, I got to spend the money to train the crew to then be able to leverage the crew instead of thinking I can bootstrap it up.
hmm It's interesting, right? Because it's true that at first, when you're starting out and you don't have a lot of properties and a lot of infrastructure and a lot of volume, you don't have the money to afford, you know to delegate some of these things. So you could very well say, well, I'm saving on that cost, which I don't have the budget for, by doing it myself. But then it prevents you from growing and doing the actual thing that's going to allow you to get to the point where you can afford it. So so looking back, you think, you would look at it and say, even if I don't see where I would get this money from, because the budget is just not there, because the infrastructure is the volume is just too small, you would still rather pay it out of pocket than have you do it in the meantime.
Oh,
Or
absolutely,
how would you
because
approach it?
well, that's absolutely true because my time is better spent out talking to people selling than it is folding sheets, getting ready for the cleaner to go take out, go do a clean. So if you free up your time, you can quickly accelerate the rate that you're going to grow to cover that infrastructure cost very, very quickly. But
Mhm.
if you want to be extremely frugal, that's a hard habit to break.
Yeah, no, it is a habit. It does come down to that. Now, let's talk a little bit about you. So you've got a combination right now of owned arbitrage and co-hosting. You started buying properties in
Mhm.
2018. You grew that to 20 plus listings. And then regulations, right, came out that changed a little bit how you were having to think about the future, of this industry, but also how you were going to position yourself in that future. um, First off, where are you at in terms of that portfolio, as far as like the models, right? What have you learned about ownership versus arbitrage versus co-hosting? And do you have a preference for one of those models in terms of where you see yourself continuing to grow in the future?
Um, I'm only speaking about the Florida market. So I think right now, well, I'm heavy on the arbitrage. Um, then next is ownership, and then is co-host. Now the arbitrage is getting a little bit difficult. It's a little bit difficult now. It's been a little bit difficult for the past year or two, but I suspect it's going to get easier towards the end of this year as I think rent is going to start dropping on the west coast of Florida as all of the rental buildings, all the construction is coming online, and combined with the fact that people are having a hard time selling their homes now here. So that may pick up, and that's definitely going to drive the demand for co-hosting too. As people can't sell their homes, they've got to be able to pay the mortgage. I just don't see at this point in Florida me picking up more houses unless it's going to be a multifamily in a good location. I would be looking out of state in a place that has a season that's opposite of Florida.
hmm hmm So one of the things you and I have talked about off the record is how there are, to your point, properties that are sitting on the MLS that are not selling as fast, as well expected by the owner perhaps, and you see that as an opportunity, of course, in terms of adding inventory as a co-host, as a property management company. But that raises the question from the point of view of a buyer, from the point of view of an investor. In theory you could say, well, that means that more inventory is sitting on the market. It could lead to you thinking, okay, maybe it's a good time to be looking at buying property. Yet for some reason it seems like the sellers are still not lowering the prices that they're expecting yet. So where do you think that market dynamic is at the moment, from the point of view of an investor that's looking to get into the vacation rental space and buy real estate, for vacation rental purposes in Florida?
I think there are some deals out there. I go to the RIAs all the time, both Sarasota and Northport and Bradenton. And the conversation generally has been, I can't sell my place for I've renovated it. I can't sell the place for what I need or what I want to get out of it. I'm going to go into long-term rentals until the market changes and I can sell it. So if you're coming in to buy, I would look at those kinds of properties that have just recently been renovated and are sitting on the MLS and not selling for some reason. And then I would talk to somebody like myself who has experience in the short-term rental marketplace that can do an analysis on it of what is your profit margin going to look like? What are the comps look like compared to your competition in the short-term rental play market? And is there an opportunity to diversify? Is it in a location that would be conducive to, say, midterm rental too? And that gives you a greater flexibility. You're not tied to the limitation of the short-term rental, which is location. Well, I'm speaking of Florida. Location, is it near the beach, or is it near downtown? And what is your design quality? Is it a one of one or one of 10, or is it just generic like everybody else's? If you're not going to be one of one, then you can look at midterm, which doesn't have to be as highly stylized as short term. It's not, they're not going to a midterm for the experience.
Hmm. 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 Now, do you think, because from what you just described, the seller is thinking to themselves, I'm not going to lower the price. I'm just going to wait until things get better. I'm
Mhm.
just going to wait until I can get the price that I'm hoping to get. And that's where you see an opportunity of like helping those sellers make money in the meantime, which we'll touch on as well. But do you think the seller is missing something in that reflection of saying, I'm just gonna hold off, I'm not gonna lower the asking price? Because from everything I've heard about Florida, again, just in general, there seems to be a lot of, and you were mentioning this earlier as well, units under construction, a lot of inventory that's coming onto the market, that's going to be new inventory too. So if that's true, and there's already an excess of inventory sitting down on the MLSs, and there's more coming on, are they wrong by thinking, let me hold on my asking price, because because in the future I'll be able to get the price that I want? Should they rather sell right away, perhaps start lowering the price right away, because there's a risk of more supply coming into the market that's newer, affecting that ability to get their price even further? Or do you think they're having the right thinking, the right mindset, when they're deciding to hold off, make some money in the meantime, and expect and hope that things will get better, and that they'll be able to sell at the price they were hoping?
I think you're right. The people that are holding on are, there's a certain amount of pride and ego that's in there, in addition to their sunk cost during their fix and flip. There is also a lot of mixed signals in the market of new inventory coming on, at middle to high cost property. So I'm thinking Lakewood Ranch in particular, where you're starting at 500K and hitting a million really quickly. So there's a sprawl of those little mansions around Lakewood Ranch, and then there's a whole swath of apartments that are being developed all down 75. So you have to ask yourself: is there a demand for an older building, even if it's been renovated? And what would that be? Combined with, are we still seeing the same strength of migration into Florida that's going to absorb all of this high end inventory? That would be coming from New York, Connecticut, Massachusetts, California, where they have to buy the more expensive properties. Um, and then what inventory is going to be left over for the locals to consume? So I think part of that lock-in, that freeze of why people are saying, "Well, I'm going to do a long-term rent and hang on," is because they don't know what the future is in the next 6 months for the market.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
I don't think
So
they're
it's the
thinking long term.
it's the uncertainty. They
Yeah, very
rather,
much.
and then where you come in is you're telling them, well, if there's uncertainty, don't lock yourself into a long-term rental situation that you won't be in a position to easily get out of. Can you tell us a little bit more about that in terms of where you see the opportunity there, for you to grow your portfolio, your management and co-hosting portfolio?
Certainly, certainly. I mean, this is one of the undervalued qualities of short-term and mid-term rental is the property is always accessible to the owner to walk the property in between guest changes. The property is being cleaned 2, 3, 4 times a week professionally. And it has to, everything, the appliances, everything have to be in top-notch condition. So it's constantly being maintained, which is not true if you have a long-term tenant in there. You put a long-term tenant in there, and I'll see you again in 11 months unless something catastrophic breaks. Um, that provides the ability for the owner to ensure that his property is presentable for sale at all times. It's almost always available for inspection, short-term notice. He can get in there. In addition to that, you're guaranteed a much higher ROI than you would have from an LTR. So for somebody that's in that situation where they having problems selling it and it's going to be sitting and they don't want it to sit vacant, they can start paying the mortgage and gathering up some profit. Whereas if they just took a LTR in there, long term rental, their margin is going to be razor thin, and they don't have to suffer that way. So that's where people like me can come in and help these people out. In addition to that, it adds another value metric to that for the brokers and for the buyers. If they can look at it and say, "Oh, I know what it would get for a long-term rental, and that deal doesn't look too interesting because it's too thin. But for a medium and short-term rental, I see a much higher, much fatter profit margin. That property is now going to have greater value to me."
Hmm. Hmm.
So everybody benefits: the buyer, the seller, the broker.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. And let's talk a little bit about where do you start experimenting and getting familiar with midterm rentals? How does midterm rental become part of your radar, and part of what you are trying to make sure that you incorporate as part of your rental strategy?
Certainly, Florida has a very wild seasonal swing. And right now, we're at the top of our high season. We have Major League Baseball spring training going on. We have spring break. Our occupancy for hotels, for short term, for midterm, everything, anybody that has a garage, we're at 100% occupancy and charging great rates. Now, we're going to drop down to 30, 40% occupancy in August, September, and October. So, with that in mind, that's when I started looking at how do I solve this low season problem? And then you start doing all the usual things that is recommended to do for midterm, which is contact ALE, for example, look at housing specialists, relocation specialists, insurance companies, um, workforce housing, medical, look at hospitals that are staffing up, etc. And this is really this really defines the difference in my mind between midterm and short-term rental is not the length of stay, but the way you're marketing. And short-term rental, you're trying to be as pretty as possible, so you have that beautiful picture set on your usual small STR OTAs, and people are buying by the picture. It's usually the wife that's buying by the picture. Now with midterm, you're talking to a completely different group that they want to know that they have a yard, a kitchen, because they're going to be there 3 months, possibly 9 months, and how is that going to accommodate their lifestyle? Having a peak house is not so appealing after the first month. So the difference there is, and this is also, it helps with the season, is if we start outbound marketing now, whether it's doing social media, email marketing, phone calls, it's not going to start paying off now. It's going to start paying off uh, as we hit the low season, because there's always a lag in your marketing. So now marketing hard is going to fill in that bottom trough of our low season in August, September, and October.
So do you think it has to do, mostly with that seasonality component of trying to get something more stable for the months with less demand, and how does that play in versus the regulatory pressure? Like, because I guess both of those are also, something that makes midterm rentals very, very attractive and very interesting for the future of this industry. But it sounds like you started looking at it, first from the point of view of how do we balance for the months with low demand. But then there was also the regulation that you were talking about that came out to tax anything rented for less than 7 nights. So you had to shut down some Airbnbs. Where did that regulation, come about? And
Sure.
do you see that being something that is replicated elsewhere as well?
Um, the timing was fortuitous for me because I was already looking at making that transition. But Sarasota City passed an ordinance where they're basically trying to tax the short-term rentals out of their market. Um, so they started enforcing the 7-day minimum, so you couldn't rent for less than 7 days. And they had always had that, but they never had the ability to enforce that. So they bought some software that allowed them to scrape all the OTA sites, and then they would look for those properties and try and identify them, and then identify the owners, and then send them the nasty letters of, you can't rent for less than 7 days. You have to register it. You have to pay for the inspection, and you have to pay the OTA tax, and a long list of other inspections, etc. So uh, that gave me the opportunity to pull out of the center of Sarasota, which also was prohibitive. The utilities are higher in Sarasota City than they are in the county. So it gave me the impetus to pull out of that and then look at where can I actually work inside the city. And by going to midterm, that puts me over the 7-day limit. So I'm usually no less than 2 weeks, but usually 1 month to 9 months. So that takes me completely off the radar because there are softwares programmed to only look for a 7-day minimum. And that solved almost no, that solved all of the problems. And the cool thing is, because they scrape the sites only periodically, not continuously, when we get into high season like we are now, everybody switches to 1-day minimums. And it'll take them a while to catch those. And by that time, we're out of high season and we've switched our markets back to midterm, and we're back to 30-day minimums, or at least longer than 7 days. So we never really fall on their radar.
Hmm. Okay, so there are ways to go around that. But in terms of where that's coming from, and whether you see this being something that is also implemented elsewhere, what are your thoughts on that? Because it is one of the biggest risks that this industry faces. and we've seen some very high profile, regulations, such as what happened in New York and whatnot. But then Florida has, at least until at some point, been seen as a place that was open,
Mhm.
that was not going to be putting as much regulation. um, why do you think that may be changing, or do you think that is changing, or do you think this is just something that happened in this particular market, but not necessarily something for concern in terms of the future for regulations in other markets?
Um, well, the Florida market, they at a state level, they've yet to really commit to a law that would prohibit the municipalities from taxing or regulating the STR and telling them that the regulations can only be done at state level. We've gotten close a
Mm,
couple times, um, and I think the last one just it didn't get passed by DeSantis, and I it was the regulations were too ambiguous, um, and there was too many loopholes for the municipalities to still regulate. The municipalities that are doing regulation, um, how to put this, they're they're sort of NIMBYs in that they want their communities to be like they were back in the 70s. And that train has passed. We have a new generation here, and I think the drive for that will end in, say, um, about 5-10 years, as those people age
mhm,
out. The people
mhm,
that
mhm,
moved here to retire and all they have their retirement friends, because and this is true of Sarasota. Sarasota used to be a very old gray community, and now there's a lot more younger people here, and so that's going to change the political landscape more in the favor of STR because they understand the sharing economy.
Interesting. That's interesting. So that's the challenge. There is getting the state to prohibit municipalities from setting their own regulations, and that, you said, is something that's been attempted but just hasn't been uh, it hasn't gone
Right.
through. Interesting. Okay, makes sense. Now let's talk a little bit more about how you price, you know midterm rentals that also happen to be short-term rentals during some months, right? Because I mean, there's less data available, as far as deciding what's the optimal price for a monthly booking, or a midterm rental of any kind. It's not like there's these data tools that'll just scrape the OTAs and tell you what the comparables are renting for. So what's unique about your approach to figure out what's the right pricing for the midterm rental, that also, as I said earlier, it happens to be available for short-term rentals for other periods as well?
There there are market forces in the midterm rental, just like there are market forces in the short-term rental. You just have to be aware of them. Um, the the key driver is the insurance industry, where your house burns down, they're going to pay for a rental while yours is being repaired, and it has to be like for like. So ideally, it would be the place next door. You used to have a 3-2 in this zip code so that your kids could go to this school. They're looking for a property that as closely resembles that one as possible. Now, in addition to that, because it has to be furnished, that's going to add a cost on top of that, insurance, etc. And then you end up with you just count that up and add your margin on top. And generally, it was it you're working within a pretty hefty budget for the insurance companies. Um, the corporate housing is pretty much the same. They understand that the prices are going to be higher because it's furnished and it's short term. It's a short term lease. that's going to push up that the because this is the difference in the mentality, the thought process of long term. Long term, you're not paying for the cost of the furniture, and every year you're going to have to get a new tenant that you're going to lose time on, where you're
Hmm.
refurbishing, repairing it. So you figure you're losing 2 to 4 weeks a year for every time you turn over that 1 year tenant. If you're doing midterm right, it's long enough that you're getting a nice long booking, and then you have that long booking to find the next booking that's going to be long. You're not constantly chasing your next tenant every year because you're constantly marketing that. And the extra kicker there, the amplifier of that, is say I had a midterm rental that was 3 months and it ends in the middle of the month, and starting at the beginning of the next month I got another 9 month rental coming up to insurance, and I got that gap. I know I got that gap way in advance. I can start marketing for short-term rental to fill that gap. So the short-term rental leverage gives me ways that I can stay at 100% occupancy and really goose my income, even though I have the stability of the midterm market. Uh, Specifically with regard to pricing, this is very rough rule of thumb of uh, double long-term rent should be where you're shooting for STR, and 1.5% for midterm. But all of that, all of that depends on season and location.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. So, in other words, so because I can think of two strategies here. I can think of the strategy of you prioritize monthly rentals and you fill in gaps with short-term rentals,
Mhm.
where you can also have the other approach of prioritizing short-term rentals, and then whatever is just the low season, let's say, you go and put in as MTRs. Would you say that deciding one or the other has to do with, whether there's a regulation in place, and the market and the type of property, or at a strategy level you think one is better than the other in
Well,
general?
I'm following the latter strategy that you mentioned simply because high season is so high here. Uh,
Yeah.
we everybody and his uncle is in short term for the 3 months, and then when we come out of that, going into that and coming out of that, is when I start buddying up with my other hosting buddies and start
Hmm.
using their inventory as part of my inventory for marketing for midterm. So the work the work is for the midterm, and the easy time to make money is during the high season. It's hard on my cleaners, but midterm is when I'm working to market, and right now I'm not working to market. They're coming to me,
Okay.
and it's very much like you talked about earlier. One is inbound, one is outbound. Right now they're coming to me, and I'm going outbound for filling in slow season.
Hmm. And so there's just no scenario, like it just makes no sense to have a midterm rental in the middle of the high season, because as much as there's a premium from the insurance, it won't pay as much as the premium that the guests pay in the middle of high season. um, Now, just on that note, when it comes to, midterm rentals, right? What's your strategy there, as far as, like, you know I'm sure you want to start working on them more in advance,
Mhm.
right? With larger booking windows. But is there a point when you tell yourself, okay, I didn't get, an insurance, monthly stay, so I now open it up to, to short-term rentals. Let's say you're looking at a low season, right? We know your priority is the monthly stay. Have you gotten so good at marketing that, monthly midterm stay, that it's going to get booked? Or do you still have to keep an eye on, okay, maybe we just won't get that insurance or corporate housing booking, so therefore let me turn back on the ability to rent it, short term, even if it's not going to be ideal, even if the occupancy rate is going to be low and the rates are going to be low, just because it's that or nothing?
Um, well, first of all, because of we're actually outbound marketing. Midterm rental business is all about relationships, building relationships with all the people that are going to be looking for housing. And these are well known, well understood entities. So to a large extent, you will know fairly well in advance because they don't do anything last minute. You're looking at corporate
Mhm.
housing. They know that Bob, the executive, is planning next month to fly to Punta Gorda to work at the remote HQ for 6 weeks. So
Mhm.
you know that's coming. And then you just map out your calendar and then turn on, make available in the short term rental calendars those holes that you have. But it's not uncommon. I also do housing for refugees for relocation. It's not uncommon to get them to come in for 2 weeks and then extend for 3 months while they're trying to get settled with visas, job, uh, healthcare, etc. So the relationships that you develop tell you are they're going to tell you what's coming. You can read the tea leaves.
Mhm.
Same thing with
And how do you
corporate housing,
manage?
uh, um,
Yeah.
workforce housing.
Okay. Okay. I was gonna say, how do you manage not to go crazy with the management of the calendars and blocking and unblocking, and now there seems to be something coming in on the midterm rental side. So let's not get short term bookings, and then, oh, it turns out that's not confirmed. Let's open it back up. Like I'm sure there's things now that you didn't know when you were first starting to juggle with MTR and SDR. So what are some of those best practices to make the most out of both?
That's a good question. To me, the midterm and dealing with the calendar, until you mentioned it, I didn't really think about it because it feels like STR moving very slowly. And if you're doing STR now, let's caveat this with Florida's high and low season is, let's use an example of say Houston or Dallas. They have seasonal swings too, but their seasonal swings are not as dramatic as ours are. So
Hmm.
the strategy would be even more difficult there because the swings are much flatter, so you can't really predict where you're going to be going low. Whereas here, we can, and the same way that we do price optimization, revenue management during the high season, where we're calculating out how much can I charge, and how much are the hotels charging, what's our competition charging, how high can I get it, and how late to the last minute is it going to be before I drop my prices. You kind of do that filling in the calendars between with your midterms and your short terms during the slow season. It just happens a lot slower. And all of a sudden if all of a sudden for some reason somebody in a midterm needs to cancel early, I know I can get it filled at short term. It may not be at the rate that I want, but I know I'm going to be able to get it occupied. It may be occupied
Hmm.
at break even until I can get another midterm or my next midterm term starts up. But at the same time, I'm going to be on the phone with, say, workforce housing, construction guys and say, hey, I got openings here and I know you're staying at Best Western. How would you like to stay here? I can match the rate and you get a kitchen. So,
Hmm. Hmm.
and
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense.
personality wise, I prefer calling out. I like talking to people.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, for sure. And one of the things too is, there's on the short term rental side, there's pricing elasticity, as in, an increase or a decreasing price
Hmm.
will affect the demand,
Hmm.
and of whether someone converts and books, or doesn't. Uh, how elastic would you say the midterm rental market is? Is there still a need to go, really do a lot of market analysis and see, okay, where's the market at, and be very sort of strategic about where you're pricing? Or will just a rule of thumb, like you said earlier, 1.5 times, the long-term rental suffice, because there's not that much pricing elasticity. So even if you're a little bit more expensive or a little bit cheaper than the alternative, it's not like it's going to make that much of a difference on whether someone books or doesn't book.
Well, the thing that you're in midterm rental, your competitor is Zillow. So you want to look at Zillow, see what the long-term rental rates are, then take a step back and how much of a premium am I going to have to add for the owner or for the broker to have a shorter lease, because there is going to be a upcharge on that. And then how much is it going to cost me to go out and rent the furniture for 60, 90 days? Because this is what uh, corporate housing, the big corporate housing companies do, is they will go into the retail market, rent a place, rent the furniture, and then put a margin on top of that. So, and
Really, they'll rent the furniture?
yeah, 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 because
Okay.
they have a contract for say 6 months. They don't want that inventory after 6 months, so they're going to go into the retail market. They're going to pay a premium on the rent because it's a short lease. Then they're going to rent the
Hmm.
furniture so they can dump the furniture at the end of the 6 months, and then they're going to put their margin on top. The reason why you're able to compete against that is, one, you have um, the ability to provide management. So you can, and the management is the 24-hour support, et cetera, cleanings, all that other stuff that you would bring over, all the services that you would bring over from doing STR. In addition, you're going to do a nice design because you know how to do that from STR. And you're going to own the furniture, which means you can depreciate it and reuse it. So there's a
Hmm.
lot more abilities to add profit for you.
Hmm. Hmm. Now, earlier you were saying something about how you will team up with other fellow hosts and operators
Mhm.
to kind of like offer inventory in a bundle,
Yeah.
to corporate housing or whatnot. How does that work?
Well, what it does is I'm working on building the relationships and making the contacts every day. And by me gathering up other host listings, and then we say, well, okay, if we book, there's two ways we can do it. I can take a piece of the monthly income, or I can take a finder's fee. But the key thing is we're going to book off the OTAs. So the guest is, or the insurance company is not paying those 14% fees or higher for the OTAs. They're able to go direct. And then, we work out how the insurance is going to work, etc. So then I'm going over to the people that I market to and say, hey, I have this large portfolio. I am in a community of hosts so that I have maybe, say, 400 listings around the US, not just in Florida. While I am hyper focused on Florida, I can provide you any other support, any other city. And then they'll say, oh, well, that's great because, yeah, I need some in Florida, I need some in Georgia, and I need some in the LA Valley area if you know anybody. And then I then talk to my community and sort of disperse that out. But
Hmm.
it's a way of leveraging your contacts that you have, um, that you're developing now, and providing them a greater service.
Hmm. Hmm.
I'm
Okay,
not just the
and you
guy
take
in
a fee.
Florida.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And you take a fee either,
Yeah.
like you were saying, the finder's fee or a percentage of the revenue. That's interesting. And then in terms of the outreach, you said very well that SDRs is inbound, midterm rentals is it's outbound. What does that outbound look like? What is your day to day, or what is your approach or methodology when it comes to, um, you said is a relationship business. Is it like, okay, now you've got those relationships, now you don't need to continue doing outbound, or are you kind of like always looking for what's going to be that next source of midterm rental bookings, even though you've got the relationships you've already built that you are currently developing? What does that look like as far as the outreach goes?
It is, to me, normal sales in that if you're not nurturing those relationships, they'll eventually forget about you because you're not their job. They have something else, and then housing is just something they have to do. And if you think about, say, The general contractors are on the large construction sites that are going to be on the site or in the area for the duration of the contract. They're not the smaller subcontractors that are coming in and out. They're going to be there for the entire project. So they're going to be there a year to 18 months. And of course, they want a decent place to live. But those turn cycles are so slow that if you're dealing with the main corporation, they're going to forget about you by the time that project 18 months later, they're going to forget about that they booked through you. So you have to constantly, say, hey, we're still here. What do you guys got going on? I've got new properties over here. It looks like there may be a new project starting up over here. Are you guys involved? Do you know who's involved over there? And oh, by the way, could I get a list of your subcontractors? Because obviously, when they come into town, they're going to need help too. So that's just a microcosm of what you would do using workforce housing. But if you're going to approach relocation specialist or insurance, it's identical. You just touch base with them on a regular basis. You're also doing SEO and social media to that's the marketing part of just spreading the word of what you do. I go to the different real estate meetups because then you're going to meet investors and brokers and you're going to talk about what you do, which is very different from what they do. And they
Hmm.
often don't understand what it is. And then once they do, they understand, oh, yeah, I can leverage you guys. And
Hmm.
yeah, just getting out and meeting people and doing that. Now that's the marketing. The sales is, hey, calling up people and hey, what do you need? How much is it? How much? What's your budget? How can I help you? How many? How big is the family? You need a 3-2 or a 4-2? What area? All of that.
Hmm.
That's sales, and then the negotiating of when's the family going to walk the property? How much can they afford in pet fees? How many dogs do they have? And then negotiating all of that out. That's where the sales is
Okay.
arriving at the
Interesting.
price.
Okay. Yeah. Well, listen, Robert, this is super interesting. I mean, I could keep you here for 2 more hours, but yeah, just looking at the time, well, we're gonna have to wrap it up. At the end of the day, I find this to be the future for of the industry in the sense that especially in urban destinations where the regulatory concern and risk will not go anywhere and will be a potential threat at any point. Plus that second consideration that you were mentioning, as far as like the seasonality, having a way that doesn't depend on inbound to fill out low demand periods makes a lot of sense. So I really appreciate you having shared those insights, share those lessons, share your story, share your background. Where can people connect?
You can find me on SarasotaPropertyRentals.com or Robert at Sarasota Property Rentals. And I'm always happy to talk to you. Reach out to me. We can discuss what you got going on.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Robert, for your time. It was great to have you on.
Thank you.